The United States has long presented itself as a beacon of democracy and freedom on the world stage. We celebrate our Constitution, our commitment to human rights, and our role as a global leader. Yet a stark dissonance exists between this idealized image and the realities of U.S. foreign policy. The historical record reveals a pattern of behavior that is often at odds with our stated values, raising uncomfortable questions about the true nature of American power. Can a nation that consistently prioritizes its own interests above all else, even at the expense of democracy and human rights abroad, truly claim to be a force for good in the world? This dissonance lies at the heart of the argument that the United States exhibits characteristics of a failed state, not in the sense of utter collapse, but in its failure to live up to its own ideals and responsibilities. A failed state is typically defined by its inability to provide basic services to its citizens and maintain order within its borders. However, a more nuanced understanding of state failure must consider a nation's actions on the global stage. When a state consistently acts in ways that undermine international law, disregard human rights, and prioritize its own power over the well-being of others, it fails in its duty to be a responsible member of the global community. The United States' historical record is replete with examples of such behavior. From our interventions in Latin America and the Middle East, to our support for dictatorships around the world, we have often acted in ways that directly contradict our stated commitment to democracy and freedom. These actions have had devastating consequences for countless people around the world, undermining democratic movements, destabilizing entire regions, and fueling cycles of violence and instability. The gap between our rhetoric and our reality is not merely a matter of historical curiosity, it is a fundamental contradiction that continues to shape the world we live in today. By understanding the forces that drive us foreign policy, we can begin to hold our leaders accountable for their actions and push for a more just and equitable world order. A central tenet of the failed state argument rests on the United States' long and troubled history of military interventionism. From Vietnam to Iraq and Afghanistan, the U.S. has repeatedly engaged in military actions that have resulted in massive civilian casualties, destabilized entire regions, and ultimately failed to achieve their stated objectives. These interventions are often justified in the name of spreading democracy or combating terrorism, yet the outcomes tell a different story. Time and again we see a pattern of the U.S. supporting dictators and authoritarian regimes when it suits our interests, only to later intervene militarily when those same regimes become inconvenient or pose a perceived threat. The hypocrisy is staggering. We arm and fund dictators, turning a blind eye to their human rights abuses, then present ourselves as liberators when it's politically expedient to do so. This pattern is not merely a product of misguided intentions or unfortunate miscalculations, it is a deliberate strategy rooted in the pursuit of American power and dominance. The U.S. has consistently sought to shape the global order in its own image, using its military might to secure access to resources, maintain economic hegemony, and eliminate potential rivals. The human cost of this pursuit, the countless lives lost, the displacement of populations, the environmental devastation, is rarely acknowledged in our official narratives. The claim that the U.S. acts solely in self-defense, that our military interventions are always a last resort, crumbles under scrutiny. History shows a different pattern, one of proactive intervention, often based on manufactured pretexts or outright lies. We have bombed civilians, supported coups, and propped up dictators, all while claiming to be the defenders of freedom and democracy. This dissonance between our actions and our rhetoric is not simply a matter of hypocrisy, it is a betrayal of the very values we claim to uphold. A crucial aspect of understanding the disconnect between U.S. foreign policy and its stated ideals lies in the role of public perception. How can a nation that prides itself on democracy and accountability engage in such morally questionable actions on the world stage? The answer, in part, lies in the way information is controlled and disseminated within the United States. The U.S. government, particularly its military and intelligence agencies, has a long history of manipulating information, classifying documents, and controlling narratives to shape public opinion. This manufacturing consent ensures that the public remains largely unaware of the true extent of U.S. actions abroad, or that critical information is often revealed long after it can have any impact on policy decisions. Moreover, mainstream media outlets often act as stenographers to power, uncritically repeating official government statements and framing complex issues in simplistic, often jingoistic terms. Dissent is marginalized, and alternative viewpoints are rarely given a platform. The result is a public that is woefully ill-informed about the realities of U.S. foreign policy and its consequences. This lack of transparency and accountability is deeply troubling. In a true democracy, citizens have a right to know what their government is doing in their name and to hold their leaders accountable for their actions. However, the U.S. system is designed in a way that shields those in power from meaningful oversight, particularly when it comes to foreign policy. This lack of accountability creates a dangerous feedback loop, allowing for the perpetuation of harmful policies and the erosion of democratic values. The notion of the United States as a failed state may seem extreme to some. After all, the U.S. remains a global superpower with a powerful military, a strong economy, and a functioning, albeit flawed, democracy. However, the label failed state is not a binary designation, it is a spectrum, and the U.S., while not in a state of complete collapse, exhibits many of the characteristics that define state failure. The U.S. government's inability to provide basic necessities to all its citizens, its history of human rights abuses within its own borders, and its disregard for international law and norms all point to a failure to live up to its responsibilities. This failure is not inevitable. It is a choice. It is a choice to prioritize power over people, profit over justice, and militarism over diplomacy. However, even in the face of these systemic challenges, there is hope. The rise of independent media and alternative news sources has begun to challenge the dominance of corporate media and provide a platform for critical voices. Social movements are demanding greater transparency and accountability from our leaders. The task ahead is daunting, but the stakes are too high to ignore. We must confront the uncomfortable truths about our nation's past and present if we hope to create a more just and equitable future. The first step towards change is awareness. We must educate ourselves and others about the realities of U.S. foreign policy and its impact on the world. We must demand greater transparency and accountability from our elected officials, and we must work together to build a world where diplomacy, cooperation, and human rights are valued above all else.